Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishers, and welcome to our webinar this evening with Jen Kelly. Just before we get started, I would like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. And the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario, is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Jennifer Kelly. Jen works at the Provincial Outreach Program for Early Years, which has the great acronym POPPY, where she is a teacher consultant and working through the province of British Columbia. As you'll find out in her presentation today, and you'll see, she's passionate about literacy learning, with more than 20 years experience in primary teaching. She completed her PhD at the University of British Columbia with a focus on professional learning for teachers. She is the author of Active Reading Classrooms, and now on tonight's talk, the Reggio-Inspired Literacy in Primary Classrooms. And I think you'll agree with me when, as you're listening, that Jen loves to explore ways to infuse theory with practice when working with primary teachers. And whenever you hear sort of that combination, you always know you're in for a good session. So Jen, I'll get your slide deck up here, and welcome. It's great to have you here, and we'll get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Lionel. Okay, thank you so much for being here tonight. I know that things are really busy right now in education, and I just really appreciate you being here and looking at all things Reggio with me for the next little bit. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Reggio Emilia and the approach and how it began, because it's a really interesting story. So the Reggio Emilia approach was developed after World War II by Luis Malaguzzi, and along with many parents who lived in the Reggio Emilia area and the surrounding villages. They really wanted to collectively improve early childhood education, and have a deep investment in their children's educational experiences, so, especially in the areas of critical thinking and collaboration. So this is really interesting. The first school in Reggio Emilia was initially financed by the sale of trucks, tanks, and other items abandoned by the German army as they retreated from the city. So they took that money and really put it to good use in their education system. So that was after World War II, and then probably around the 70s, other places in Italy started to show this immense interest in what was going on in Reggio Emilia with this interesting approach to childhood education. So, so there began an interest in Italy and even farther throughout different areas of Europe. So Malaguzzi traveled throughout Europe and Italy, of course, to learn more about other approaches to early childhood education, as well as sharing knowledge about what was happening in Reggio Emilia. So it became even more interesting in the early 90s when an American newspaper, Newsweek, declared a preschool in Reggio Emilia to be one of the 10 best schools in the world. So you can imagine how the popularity and interest and enthusiasm for what was happening in little old Reggio Emilia became a focal point worldwide. So many countries started asking questions about this unique approach, wanting to learn more about what was happening, and it went huge all over the world. So a lot of worldwide interaction with organization in Reggio Emilia called Reggio Children, which is set up to provide professional learning opportunities to educators all over the world. And the really interesting thing is that when you are in that space, you feel the power of the philosophers that have really influenced Reggio Emilia approach. You can feel the collective wisdom of all of the teachers that are so invested in Reggio Emilia approach. And they use the word experience or approach rather than model because they say that it's constantly evolving as we learn more about children and how they learn. So my interest really came about early on. I started to hear about Reggio Emilia approach along with the rest of the world, started to do some research, and I just really was attracted to the idea of a child-centered curriculum and having children really involved with their path in education. So I watched videos, I read blogs, talked to colleagues, but what made the biggest impact in my educational world was when I went to an international study group in Reggio Emilia at Reggio Children and was immersed for a week in the learning. It really actually was educationally life altering for me as I thought about how we can listen deeply to children and see them more holistically and with great potential. So this book, which I'll talk a little bit more about the approach so you have an idea, but this book is really just a series of narratives connected to theory. So I have a little bit of theory and then some narratives that connect to classroom practice and how practice has unfolded in my world, in my classrooms, and with the students that I've been interacting with. So it's not a recipe book. It's not step by step do this because Reggio Emilia people would tell you first and foremost that their approach is constantly changing and it is all about the children that are in front of them. So this is more of an invitation into an educational content that might look a little different from what we're used to seeing in classrooms. It's an invitation to try some new practices and explore some new ways of interacting with children and reflecting deeply on your own philosophy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the foundational aspects of Reggio Emilia approach. I've set up the book so that each chapter is one of these foundational aspects that can be explored as you'd like. So I'm going to talk first about democracy, which was an area that I didn't know, that I didn't really think about as being super important obviously important in education, but super emphasized in early education until I got to Reggio Emilia. So it's one of the foundational values. Democracy is expressed in how the school is set up with a non-hierarchical staffing structure, but also with the input from the children and the children's families. It's a way of being in the school and relating to the people around us. So this strong commitment to democracy is really rooted in the experience of going back to when the first Reggio Emilia school came to play was, a time when Italy had just gone through this period of deep oppression and they wanted better for their children. They wanted their future generations to not suffer as they had. But in that way, democracy is not directly taught to the children. It's instead children are taught to notice and nurture habits like deep listening, thinking critically, working collaboratively, and how they learn with and through others. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this played out in in my community as we were experiencing a super tragic event that really tested our strength as a community. We had a massive forest fire that destroyed over 100 homes in a very small rural region. Um, a lot of the residents were evacuated, but many stayed behind to save their homes and their neighbors' homes, like they've been doing for decades. And a lot of the students in the school, in the community school, lost their homes to the fire. So they're grieving alongside all of the rest of the community. It's also really traumatic because most of the children were sent away during the evacuation to keep them safe, but they might have had parents that stayed behind to band together with the rest of the families and try and save our homes. So the trauma the children experienced started to really surface in different areas in classrooms, and it was noted that we needed to start paying attention to that. So I really noticed at one time during an exploration time, I noticed that the conversation happening between students was really focused on what they experienced during either the evacuation or coming back and seeing the devastation of our community. So they were saying things as they were engaged in pretend play around, watch out for that hot spot, or um, did you lose your home, and did you pack everything that you needed? Like just really important language that we needed to pay attention to. So the other teacher and myself thought we really needed to allow for this opportunity for children to voice how they're feeling about everything. And so we started to talk about it more. One of the things that I did is I read a story to them called 10 Beautiful Things. And it's a lovely story about a granddaughter who was picked up by her grandmother with unknown circumstances, and she's taken to her grandmother's home quite far away. And on the drive, she's feeling very stressed and very worried. And her grandmother invites her to look for 10 beautiful things along the way. So she did, and lots of the students had heard the story before, but they were welcoming a chance to hear it again. So we read the story, and then we went on a research and record walk so that we could notice and write down all the beautiful things that we saw. Yes, there was burnt houses. Yes, the trees were bare. Things looked different, but we looked really carefully for those beautiful things. And we saw the cedar tree in the schoolyard had 2 blue jays in it, which was we weren't used to having blue jays in that tree. We saw excavators working on cleaning up debris where a house had once stood. We saw signs that read "Shuswap Strong" all over. So we came back to the classroom and we did some writing, some drawing, some creating, just to kind of work through what they picked one beautiful thing that meant the most to them, and we just really focused on the beauty of our community. Not gonna lie, there were some tears, but it was a wonderful way to come together. So that idea of community really carried through to a lot of the conversations and a lot of learning that continued to happen. We brought up the idea of what is community and started to conduct investigation into the word community. I wrote the word common on the board and asked the children what they thought it meant. And we started having conversations about community and what it has to do with the word common. And the children were starting to see how, people who live in a community often have common interests or want a common lifestyle. And that brought up a whole bunch of different information and knowledge and working through some of the things that the students were going through. Then I asked the question, what did community have to do with our forest fire? And one little one had the most touching answer. She said, it's like a puzzle. When there are holes in a puzzle, they get filled by someone else. That is community. People helping each other with what they can do. Not one person can do everything. And it spoke to the experience that we had gone through, and really looking at our community as an asset. Okay, so another area that would fall under democracy is the idea of children's rights. So children have rights, and it's our responsibility towards them to refer to them as citizens of the world. Every child has the right to a high quality education. Every child is in the society with a voice that needs to be valued and respected. So with that, we talk a lot about child-centered learning. Children have the right to guide their own learning and direct their learning to create deep levels of meaningful engagement. So this idea of child-centered learning can sometimes be mistaken for free-for-all or lack of structure. But in Reggio-Inspired classrooms, educators that know child-centered learning know that it's really quite structured and consistent with predictable routines, and the child-centeredness of it comes from honoring children's curiosities and their questions. And as educators, as teachers, we can provide those unique opportunities for to create those environments for learning to happen. So children are thinking critically, they're making decisions, they're figuring out solutions on a daily basis. What they're not doing is memorizing the right answers. Okay, listening is a really important part of the Reggio approach as well. So listening is essentially a search for meaning. And we're saying, when we're deeply listening to the children and to the other adults in the room, that there's value in what they're saying. It's worth listening to. And we also talk about how listening takes patience and time. And it's not only just a dialogue, but there's also an aspect of personal reflection. So another learning opportunity that came out of the wildfire, was the children brought up that we were lacking a public library. So our public library burned to the ground, and we were lucky in our school because our school was untouched due to amazing local people that made sure that was the case. But we kept our school library. But the children were really worried about the fact that the rest of the community didn't have access to books. And so we talked a little bit more about that. And one child mentioned that they had seen a little free library when she was visiting her grandparents. So the children were really excited about this idea of a little free library. And they were asking questions about what it looked like, how does it work, who checks out books, what if books go missing, how could this work in our community? And we really banded together. I won't go through the whole process just because of time, I'm very aware of, but it was very interesting to get to the process of finding out where we could put a little free library. We connected with a local corner store. We connected with the carpentry students at the high school that was close by, and asked them if they would be willing to make us a little free library, which they enthusiastically did. There was a little bit of letter writing back and forth, which was really fun for the students. And then stocking it with some books. So we put out a call for used books to our community. We also went to thrift stores that helped us pick out some books as well. So it was a wonderful way for the students to get involved in something really important in the community. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about children's assembly. So imagine all children sitting on chairs in a circle discussing important issues of the day. So that's an assembly. In Reggio-Inspired classrooms, it's a time to gather in a public space to talk about shared interests, It's also a time to talk about the learning that's happening. It's generally happens at the beginning of the day, and it's a time for us to collaboratively plan our day as well. So there is consistent and predictable routines, but there's also time to talk about what new learning is emerging, what we need to continue that learning. Um, all of those really interesting things that happen in a classroom. But it's also a time to discuss even larger issues, such as the need for a little free library. It gives students the time to think about how democracy works, how decisions are made, but also how to be responsible for making decisions in a way that is thoughtful and effective. It's a time for them to learn about their rights and responsibilities as citizens of the school, of the community. So, in one of these assemblies, I noticed something starting to happen with the students. There was some conflict over grabbing a comfort item. So, a lot of the children were running to the area so that they could be first to grab this little stuffed rabbit that they could hold on to during assembly. So I voiced it to the children and asked them the question, what can we do about this situation? And they had lots of different ideas about, taking turns and setting up a schedule. But we went a little bit deeper with it into this idea of the concept of comfort. So we talked a little bit about why do we need comfort? Like talking about the rabbit as a comfort um, item for the children. We talked about what is comfort? How does it feel? So I read a story to them called "When We Were Alone" by David Robinson. Lovely story, and it's really centered around this idea of resiliency and finding comfort where we can. After I read the story, I heard students starting to whisper to each other and get ideas about could we make our own comfort items? Would that be a great solution to the conflict that had been happening in the classroom? And so we discussed it as a class, and everyone was really excited about the idea. So we talked about how comfort items usually are made out of soft materials. We did some brainstorming of what soft materials we could bring into the classroom. Over the next couple of days, I asked the students to make a picture or a diagram of what they wanted their comfort item to look like so that they would be ready to start building when we had the materials ready. And then encourage the students to label their diagrams with whatever, with beginning sounds, partial words, whole words, sentences, wherever they were in their writing journey. So then it was time, once we got the materials in place, we could start to build. And the children worked really diligently to create the visions that they had drawn. And they were most excited to have their own comfort items to hold during the assembly and anytime they needed comfort throughout the day. Okay, so the next big idea then I'm going to, before I get to that, I just wanted to point out that at the end of each chapter, I have a little graph describing what you can do as you are responding to the children in front of you, because obviously this is an emergent way of working with children. It's looking for opportunities that come up and being responsive to them. But I did want to give a couple of ideas. So if you observe something, then you might, respond in this way. So that graph is at the end of every chapter, describing a little bit more. Okay, so documentation is another very important aspect of Reggio-Inspired or Reggio Emilia approach. And what documentation, the purpose of it is to provide a story of the child's learning journey. It's all about making meaning, about their learning, about their thinking, and it's to have a better idea of the child's thought processes. So it's a really important part of getting into the head of the child and ensuring that the child is learning what they, in terms of the emergent curriculum, but also in terms of the content that we teach in through our curriculum as well. So the document is um, interpreted and it's described by the child and it is assessed as well. So it's really to often open up a public space to visualize the learning. So a lot of the documentation is put up on walls, on different areas of the classroom to provide a living record of learning. Because learning should be visible. And by co-creating this documentation with children, we get to see that their thinking and work is valued and that it should be documentation should always be really purposeful, social, um, empowering for children. So it's really all about the process, not the final product. That we can really see the thinking that occurred for children and where it's going to continue to go after. Often, this area can be a public space for students to talk about their learning with other students and get excited about where they've gone to with their learning in different areas. Okay, so one way that I wanted to document some of the teaching that or some of the learning that was happening was through photos and videos of children and interacting and learning throughout the year, sorry. So I would use photos and videos and then put them in a very public space so that children could see each other's learning happening and also explain some of the learning that was happening. So sometimes I would have a little interview with the child and add their words to the learning that was happening. Oftentimes, children wanted to give like an impromptu oral presentation of the learning that was happening that was depicted in the photo. Children sometimes would challenge other children to guess what learning was happening. So it was really an exciting thing when these photos or videos became accessible to the rest of the group. Also, the environment is seen as a third educator within Reggio approach schools. Not just the aesthetics, but also the material that's in the environment is really important to the learning. The environment is meant to provoke the children's learning by having them explore, research, and discover concepts through material, and also allow children to have different places to work and different ways to move their bodies during when they are working. So super important part. So a shared reference point also allows for that learning to happen. So as I mentioned, through photographs or video taking, we can have that discussion about what we're noticing. And I did this purposefully with a class that I was working with when we started to practice having hands down conversations. So there's a lovely book out there called Hands Down, Speak Out. And the authors describe a process of listening and talking through hands down conversations. So these are meant to be high quality conversations that are authentic, that really mimic how we dialogue in society. There are ways to practice questioning each other or agreeing or disagreeing with each other in really respectful ways, producing evidence, sharing interpretations. So the students were working on a hands down conversation, and I decided to videotape them as they were having this conversation. And I turned it back on them the next day and showed them the video without any sound so they could really focus on who was talking, what was the body language, what other nonverbal communication skills did they see happening. And then I just asked the group, what do you notice? And it was so exciting for them to see so and so is talking a lot of the time. and this person isn't getting their voice in, and this person, doesn't seem as interested in the conversation. So that led to learning how we could continue to have these hands down conversations in more effective and respectful ways, where we're honoring all voices. And even the students that were speaking a lot, they kind of noticed that they were, and thought, okay, I'm going to make sure that I invite other people into the conversation as well. Okay, so let's take a look at relational learning, a huge part of all education and a super huge interest of mine. So, social constructivism is heavily rooted. Reggio Emilia approach is heavily rooted in social constructivism, and that can be described as the creation of knowledge from experience with others. So, children gain an understanding of how that other people have different perspectives, and that they can use that knowledge to build on their own knowledge or change their point of view, um, discuss further. So it's an exciting way for children to be in relation to others. So I noticed this coming about in an interesting way as I was reading a book called Thank You Amu, and it's a lovely story about an older lady who is in an apartment building, and she's cooking this stew all day, and the delicious aromas were wafting out of her window, and different community members were coming to her place and saying, "It smells so good," and she would of course offer some of the stew to the different community members. And and by the end of the day, when it was time for her to have dinner, there was no stew left. So spoiler alert, all the community members went and brought food to her, and they ended up having this wonderful dinner party that was impromptu and lovely. So I read this story, and then we went on a walk and talk, which we often did after read alouds. And I was overhearing some of the children discussing the concept of sharing food and really connecting it to these ideas of celebration. Um, and I also thought, wow, what a great opportunity to dive a little deeper into those concepts of celebration, and um, bringing in some traditional aspects of the family celebrations. But also, what I didn't expect to happen is they said, can we have a lunch party as a celebration? And they were really focused on this idea that they would share food and it would be a celebration, and that they would plan the whole thing. So, of course, I said, yes, sure. That led to a whole bunch of work happening over the next week, where they were planning, they were making invitations, which had to be personalized for each child in the class, along with what they needed to bring food wise for the celebration, if it was carrot sticks or cheese or whatever. So there's a lot of thought that went into this, and even down to the music that was going to be played and how the room was going to be set up. So they put a lot of their own touches on this, and grew together as a community of learners through that opportunity. And all I had to do was really write an email to the parents letting them know what was going on. So it was lovely to have them guide their learning in that way. Okay, so looking at text sets and experts, text sets can provide that differentiation of materials so that all the children have access to learning about a topic through different medium, through different complexity levels, different ways that we can share information with children. So through books, through websites, through videos, through diagrams. So I love this idea because it really allows children to have a deeper understanding of a concept over time as they encounter the same topic, but in different ways to expand their vocabulary and learn from others. So we decided that we would do a deep dive into stink bugs. So in fall in British Columbia, in the area I live in anyways, we have a whole bunch of stink bugs that invade our space. But they're so funny because they walk like really, really slowly and almost prehistoric, awkward movements. When they fly in, they land, they almost like dive bomb wherever they're landing. So they're just really funny little creatures. But they do have a stinky odor that is emitted when they're squished. So some people say it smells a little bit like apple cider. I'm not sure, but yes, when they're squished. So I didn't allow the students to squish the stink bugs in the classroom, but even when you pick them up sometimes and squish them a little bit, then you can get this quite intense smell. So the children were super into stink bugs and learning all that they could about them. So I gathered materials so that we could go deeper into that study. So that whole idea of text sets, providing a lot of different entry points for children. I've got some great books from the library, even a poetry book called Hey There, Stink Bug. So we had a whole bunch of different materials and videos and things to explore. And we started documenting the learning by creating a list of facts that we found out on one area of the classroom. So the child who found the fact would share it with myself in the class, and then we would write it down and put the child's name beside it to give them that sense of empowerment, ownership over that fact. And that just continued to fill a lot of our learning time, our exploration time for a while. And we even videotaped the stink bugs walking around in the classroom. So we had that to look back to at a different time. Okay, so I'm going to move on to learning through the senses. And really look at the use of the words theory and research. So as my quote mentions, research is a word with many meanings that can evoke laboratories, chemical formulas, and science. It is a word that does not circulate in the streets and the squares. But in Reggio Emilia classrooms, it is alive and well. So the idea that we are committed to promoting and strengthening the research role of children, that's part of our responsibility and part of the way that children can be really centered in their own interests and their own areas that they want to explore more deeply. So educators in Reggio-inspired classrooms use those terms, research and theory, to really add weight to the intensity and the importance of what children are really doing in their learning. They're looking for theories and they're testing them out. And that's a lot of the learning that is happening in classrooms, which is really quite exciting. Okay, I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to jump ahead to animal habitats and talk a little bit about that. We had the pleasure of thinking deeply about animal habitats in our own area. And I put this in an exploration area so the children could gather and theorize and look deeply at different areas of habitat. And the provocation question was, how does this habitat fit this animal's needs? For some reason, the students really got quite interested in squirrels and the idea that squirrels build nests for themselves and their families, but the nest might be in a tree or it might be underground. So they started discussing what would be a safer place to have a nest if you were a squirrel. They talked about possibilities of like a nest falling from a tree, But then if the nest is underground, is there the possibility that the nest could be dug up by a dog? So we were really getting deep into this discussion about squirrels' habitat. And then one child mentioned that they had been out walking with their parents and they noticed that there was a bunch of nuts lined up on tree branches. And so I was listening a little bit more closely then to see what theories the children would come up with about that. And they started talking about different things. Was it squirrels, adult squirrels gathering nuts for their families? Was it that they would go back at night to get the nuts when they wouldn't be seen? So a lot of different theorizing came out of just that simple question about habitats and animals. And what a lovely conversation to hear the children excited about. In another area of learning, we were using a variety of materials to explore different concepts, test out different theories. And one student, John, presented with some materials, and it was very clear that he didn't know how to test out what to do with the materials. He had no experience creating from materials or testing out theories. When I asked him what he did at home for fun, he said he played video games or watched his older brother play video games. So he was just kind of sitting there crashing two pieces of wood, circular wood together. And he didn't seem to be having very much fun. So I asked him what he noticed about his materials, and he said that they make a loud noise. And I said, "Oh, okay. Do you like loud noises?" And he said, "Yes, it's like on video games, there's loud noises." So I wanted to honor what he had said and try and take it a little bit further. So I said, "I wonder what other materials make noise." And we started walking around the classroom and noticing what the other children were doing. So we went over to another child, and I thought that she was making some noise with a chopstick and like a cookie sheet. When we asked her about it, she said, "I'm not researching the noise. I'm researching how high I can get the beads to jump when I hit the chopstick on the cookie sheet." So that was another really interesting way for John to interact with Mara and get an idea of different ways that we could look at materials. So he's very interested in the chopsticks, the beads, and the cookie sheet. She was invitational with her theory building and testing out, and allowed him to get another chopstick and work with her. The interesting thing was the next day when we started exploration time, John went right to the area where there was a chopstick and a cookie sheet and picked up a bead or some beads and started continuing that investigation on his own. So that whole idea of learning from others and learning through the senses was really strong in with that encounter during exploration time. Okay, first day of snow in Canada, probably a lot of other places in the world. The first time it snows in the school year is the time that you drop whatever you had planned, and it becomes all about snow for a day. Otherwise, students are just going to look outside the window watching the snowfall. So it's a good practice to just go outside and enjoy that time, which I did this one day as the first day of snow. It was the perfect day for me to listen deeply to my students and gain an understanding of how they were learning through their senses. So we went outside. I noticed this group of children start to walk towards the treed area of the playground and started to pick up some materials. Then they went over to an area that no one had walked in. So it was just like pure snow, um, uninterrupted snow. And they were having this discussion about which object they thought would go deepest in the snow. So they were making some theories. They decided to try out their objects, and then research their theories by using a stick and a marker to determine which one had gone the deepest. And then they took their research even farther when they started to discuss the imprint that the different objects had on snow. They used the word shape, but so they really wanted to continue that research in some way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about identity as a reader and a writer. So, based on a socio-constructivist approach to learning, which we know is foundational in Reggio-Inspired classrooms, the teachers have strong beliefs about how children's learning, how children learn to read and write. So they recognize that children have an active role in the process of knowledge building. So they're not just simply receiving information, but they have to take it in and transform it in order to understand it within the context of their own lives and their own experience and their background knowledge. They also recognize that reading and writing involves a lot more than learning the alphabet. So it's not limited to the learning the instrumental techniques, but it's much more if we think of it from a socio-constructivist point of view. And they also talk about how it's not an acquisition of technique, the transcription of a code, but it's also the discovery of rules that that are rules by which the code functions. So they enter into the teaching of reading and writing almost as an inquiry into the rules that that guide how the code functions. Okay, I'm just watching the time and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit just to make sure we have some time for a conversation and tell you more about the theories behind Reggio Emilia and not necessarily you can read in the book about some of the narratives because I mean that's the most fun part, but we'll talk a little bit more about involving family and community. So in Reggio Emilia schools, they were originally built both literally and through collective decisions by the community. And that's a cornerstone of this approach. So the in Reggio inspired approaches or inspired classrooms, often there is a form of collective decision making, bringing in families, bringing in community, just really highlighting that a community, like that lovely child said, was a puzzle with parts to be filled by different community members. So there's different ways that that can happen, but one way that I want to talk a little bit about is growing food together. I was working in a really isolated rural school in Canada. They were very far away, like 90 minutes away from a tiny little grocery store, and about 180 minutes away from a community that had any kind of resources or amenities. So it was four-wheel drive vehicles only, and even during the winter, even more isolated. So this community had to be creative about how they got fresh fruits and vegetables. And we brought in, so that the community brought in to the school different methods of growing food indoors. And there was a lot of learning together involving the families and the school community. There would be a lot of cooking lunch together, using the vegetables that were grown indoors. They researched plant growth. They developed theories. It even went as far as enjoying food together by setting the table in very invitational ways that could provide like, some provocations for community members and children to talk about while they were eating their lunch. So it was just a really great way to invite community in to prepare different dishes for children to learn about not only growing food, but preparing food in a really communal way. Okay, so the last thing that I'll talk about here is just the importance of having adults having different people that they can talk to in Reggio-inspired classrooms as well. So the role of the teacher is one of researcher and theory builder within classrooms, and that doesn't stop when the children are in front of us. So the more that we can be having conversations with their educators, whether it's in the classroom building theories, um, talking about where the students are going with their learning, having another set of eyes, another person to really talk deeply with, is such an important part of our job as teachers. And we don't get it enough, but when we do get it, it's just magical. So I just had to bring that up as an important part of the Reggio inspired approach to learning. Okay, at that, I will stop because we are just about out of time and invite you back, Lionel.
There we are. That was great. Thank you very much. I knew nothing about that, so that was very informative for me as the senior physics teacher. So thank you for that, Jen. That was great.
Great.
We do have a couple minutes, and as you were talking, there were sort of a few kind of small thoughts, and then I've got a couple sort of bigger questions. Maybe we can ruminate and toss back and forth here. This one's really sort of straightforward, and it just is this focus primary, or can you see this K to 12? How does that fit in there?
So traditionally, it's in Italy, in Reggio Emilia, they would have this going up to 6 years of age often. But in a lot of places that have adopted the Reggio approach, it's definitely big in the early years in preschool and in kindergarten.
Okay.
I'm seeing so much of it in primary years as
Yeah.
well, and even some of the concepts leaking into beyond grade 3. So the book is focused on primary years. That's the experiences that I've
Yeah.
had, but it's definitely a lot of the concepts could easily go beyond that.
So then, in terms of the teachers, then is this something that that you would be experienced, or would a brand new teacher come in? Because you set up a nice framework there, and it's like, hey, if I've never taught the primary years before, it's a pretty good place to start. Or do you need to kind of have a few years under your belt and then go, yeah, I'm looking for something more? So what's my question there? I guess what's the difference between what we're doing now and what you saw going, spending some time and going to the institute and clearly kind of digesting this and going, oh, this can improve my practice if I go in this way?
Yeah, great question. I think this can be an approach that's completely accessible to a beginning teacher. So it's more about just having that specific philosophy and moving that and learning as you're learning content. So, as a beginning teacher, you're you're learning so much. But definitely, learning how to have a child-centered classroom, how to have an emergent curriculum at the same time as learning content is completely, absolutely exciting.
Yeah, yeah. I got a sense of there's a lot of Rousseau's themes through here in terms of the learning, and it seems like you're operationalizing, kind of his thoughts, if that's one way of looking at it. Then how do you pitch that to your admin? The admin think, we got a great program. Our primary years program is awesome. We don't need to change anything, and this is probably going to cost us money or whatever, that kind of thing. Is there something that you took away from that, hey, if I was talking to my administrator, this is an area I would like him or her to understand. This is what's going to make our primary years better?
Well, specifically here in BC, we have a curriculum that guides what we teach, but it doesn't guide how we teach. So there's a lot of autonomy in how teachers approach their classroom teaching, and definitely this is a great one to explore. I would say that it doesn't have to cost money. I actually went to a lovely workshop in the summer in Victoria, actually, and the presenter kept going back to the fact that there was tons of materials. It was a Reggio-inspired approach, and she kept going back to the fact that she got everything for less than $25 by approaching, um, thrift stores and places to get materials, and there's a different material exchange place, and a lot of the natural materials that are abundant in
And
BC.
high school students.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
That's great. Good. Well, seeing that you were sort of talking a little bit about money, I sometimes forget to do this. So we do have an offer, folks, that if, I think I can send this out this way as a slide out. There we go. Right now, if you're interested to go a little bit farther, which I suspect, given this appetizer of ideas, as Jen mentioned earlier, you can go deeper into all of it with her book. You can use the code RIL for Reggio-Inspired Learning 24 when you go to checkout, and you can get $5 off your next purchase, and obviously $5 off her book for finding more information there. So we encourage you can click the button there, or you can go to pembrokepublishers.com, and you can find out more information there. So Jen, I'll let you kind of have the last word as we head out here, but I'll just thank everyone for joining us. There will be a recording posted in about 24 hours. Might be a little bit longer this time. It's a professional development day here in British Columbia tomorrow, so it's a busy day. But it will come to your email, and you can catch up if you've missed part of it or want to review part of it as well there too. Now, finally, also invite you back November 6th for Bridging the Reading Gap webinar with Heather Wilms, and she will be our next presenter, and it would be great to have you back for that as well. So Jen, I'll just leave you with sort of some closing thoughts, and we'll say goodnight to everyone.
Sure. I just want to emphasize how it's not only about increasing well-being for our children, but it's about us as teachers and enjoying what we do on a day-to-day basis, and really knowing that we're making a huge impact with the children that we're working with. So just think about your own well-being as well.
Perfect. A great way to finish off the webinar. So thanks again, Jen, and thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.